Greetings to you all. I am Stephen Magezi and I'm presenting Explainable Knowledge Distillation in Deep Learning. I want to start by giving a deeper explanation on what is knowledge distillation. Knowledge distillation is a compression technique where a small model is trained to replicate a behavior of a bigger network model. In this technique, knowledge is distilled from a large complex model to a smaller, faster, and more efficient model. The bigger network model is called the teacher network, while the small network trained is called the student network. The purpose here is to retain experimental accuracy while reducing model size and inference time. This approach uses probabilistic outputs from the teacher model that are used as inputs to train the student model, which captures deeper information from the outputs that have already gone through the teacher module. The concept of knowledge distillation is based on the observation that a complex neural network not only learns to make accurate predictions, but also learns to capture meaningful and useful presentations of the data. These representations are learned by the hidden layers of the neural network and can be thought of as knowledge acquired by the network during the training process. In this context of knowledge distillation, the knowledge captured by the teacher network is transferred to the student network through a process of supervised learning, and during this process, the student network is trained to minimize the difference between its predictions and the predictions of the teacher network on a set of training examples. How does knowledge distillation work? Knowledge distillation involves two main steps, and these are training the teacher network as well as training the student network. During training the teacher network, a large and complex neural network is trained on a data set using standard training procedures. And once the teacher network has been trained, it is used to generate soft labels for the training data, which are probability distributions over the different classes instead of binary labels. These soft labels are more informative than hard labels and capture the uncertainty and ambiguity in the predictions of a teacher network. Now, in the second step, which is the student training step, a smaller neural network or a student network is trained on the same data set using soft labels generated by the teacher network. Now, soft labels are the outputs that come from the teacher network, which act as inputs in the student network. The student network is trained to minimize the difference between its own predictions and the soft labels generated by the teacher network. From the visual representation here is a small student model learns to mimic a large teacher model and leverages the knowledge or the output of the teacher model to obtain similar or higher accuracy outputs. From the visual representation here is the teacher model is trained and then its outputs are distilled and transferred as inputs into the student model. Types of knowledge distillation. There are three types of knowledge distillation, each with a unique approach during implementation. One is response-based distillation, feature-based distillation, relation-based distillation. And all these types of distillation happen at different levels in the training ecosystem, as you can see from the visualization. Relation-based knowledge happens at all levels of input, hint layers, and output. Feature-based knowledge distillation happens at the hint layers, and response-based knowledge distillation happens at the output layer, but all in the teacher model. response-based distillation. In response-based knowledge distillation, the student model learns to mimic the predictions of the teacher model by minimizing the difference between predicted outputs of both the teacher model and the student model. During the distillation process, the teacher model generates soft labels, which are probability distributions over the classes for each input example. And here the student model is then trained to predict the same soft labels as the teacher model, but here we introduce a loss function that tries to measure the difference between the predicted outputs. A continuation is a response-based knowledge distillation is particularly useful when the teacher module has a large number of output classes, where it would be computationally expensive to train a student model from scratch. By using response knowledge distillation, the student model can learn to mimic the behavior of the teacher model without having to learn the complex decision boundaries that distinguish between all the output. From the visualization here is that we have the teacher model and the student model, and we have the logits and the distribution loss. Now the logits are a computational function that is applied to the different models, the teacher model and the student model, and this computational function it helps apply the screening on the data as it goes through the model. But remember, our end goal is that we introduce a loss function, and this loss function from the previous slide, the loss function helps us measure the difference between the predicted outputs of both models. Maybe additionally, is one of the main advantages of response-based knowledge distillation is its ease of implementation, given the fact that since its approach only requires the teacher model's predictions and corresponding soft labels, it can be applied to a wide range of models and data sets. Response-based distillation also has some limitations. For example, this technique only transfers knowledge-related outputs and does not capture the internal representations learned by the teacher model, which makes it not suitable for tasks that require more complex decisions or feature extraction. The next feature is the next type is feature-based distillation. A feature-based distillation here is a student model is trained to mimic the internal representations of features learned by the teacher model. The teacher model's internal representations are extracted from one or more intermediate layers of the model, which are then used as targets for the student model. Now here is as the teacher model is being trained at different layers. As the data goes through the model, features are extracted from the model and they are used as input into the student model. That is why even when we are measuring our distribution loss, the distribution loss is applied in between the two modules, because here processing data does not reach at the exit of the model, but as data goes through the model, different features are extracted at different layers as they are fed into the student model. And during the distillation process, the teacher model is first trained on the training data to learn the task-specific features that are relevant to the task at hand. Then the student model is then trained to learn the same features by minimizing the distance between the features learned by the teacher model and those learned by the student model. This is typically done using a loss function that measures the distance between the representation learned by the teacher and the student model, such as the mean squared function. Below is the mean squared function that is used in linear regression, whereby you apply this formula as the loss function to minimize the distance between the features of the teacher model and the student model. And one of the main advantages of the feature-based knowledge distillation model is it can help the student model learn more informative and strong representations than it would learn from scratch. This is because the teacher model has already learned most of the relevant and informative features from the data. And the feature-based distillation knowledge distillation type also comes with some limitations, whereby the technique can be more computationally expensive than other types of knowledge distillation, as it requires extracting the internal representations from the teacher model at each iteration or at each layer in the neural network. The third type is relationship-based distillation. In this technique, the student model is trained to learn a relationship between the input examples and output labels. In contrast to the feature-based distillation, which focuses on transferring the immediate representations learned by the teacher model directly into the student model, relation-based distillation focuses on transferring the underlying relationships between inputs and outputs. And from the visualization here is data is fed into the teacher model, and then at different instances the model will pick out relationships between the data in the teacher model and the student model. Then the outputs from each instances is where we'll apply the distribution loss function to minimize the distance between the teacher model outputs and the student model outputs. And one of the advantages of role-based knowledge distillation is that it can help the student model learn a more robust and generalizable relationship between examples, input and output labels than it would learn from scratch. First is the teacher relationship model. The teacher model generates a set of relationship matrices that capture the dependencies between the input examples and output label. Then these are picked up by student model, which is then trained to learn the same matrices or tensors by minimizing the loss function that measures the difference between these two matrices of the student and the teacher. Though, however, generating the relationship matrices or tensors, especially for large data sets, can be computationally expensive. Additionally, a relationship-based technique may not be suitable for tasks where the relationships between the input examples and output labels are not well defined, or they can be difficult to encode into a set of matrices. Knowledge distillation training methods. There are three main types of distillation. There are three main types of knowledge distillation techniques, and these labels are assigned depending on whether a teacher model is modified during training or not. Each type has its own advantages and disadvantages, and the choice depends on the specific applications or resources that are available. The three methods are offline, online, and self-distillation. I will start with the online distillation. Online distillation is a knowledge distillation method in which the teacher network is pre-trained and then frozen. During the training of a student network, the teacher model remains fixed and is not updated. The main focus of research in this field has been on improving the knowledge transfer mechanism in offline distillation, with less attention given to the design of the teacher network infrastructure. From the visualization here is the teacher model is trained and given data, and then it is frozen. Freezing here is after giving it data and training it, you don't add it new data, and then from the predictions of the existing data without additional data is what the student model starts using to learn. And this approach has allowed for the transfer of knowledge from pre-trained as well as well-performing teachers modules to student modules, which improves the overall performance model. Second is the online distillation. Online knowledge distillation is used to transfer knowledge from a larger model to a smaller one in a sequential manner. In this method, the teacher model is updated continuously with new data, and the student model is updated to reflect this new information. This process involves the teacher model and the student model being trained simultaneously. The goal here is to have the student model learn from the teacher model's updates in real time, which enables the student model to continuously improve its performance. Here is as data goes through the teacher model will make predictions, and these predictions in real time will be supplied to the student model to also further process the data to also make predictions. And this approach typically involves a feedback loop where the teacher model's output is used to update the student model, and then the student model's output is used to provide feedback to the teacher model. So that is how the loop comes. Outputs from the teacher model are fed into the student model, and then outputs of the student model are used to provide feedback to the teacher model. This feedback is usually in form of error signals, which indicate how well the student model is performing compared to the teacher model. The teacher model then uses this feedback to adjust its parameters, and then uses adjusted parameters as new inputs to output new predictions. And one of the main advantages of online knowledge distribution is it has the ability to handle non-stationary or streaming data. This particularly is useful in applications that capture real-time data. And the last type is self-distillation. Self-distillation method employs the same network as both the teacher and student. This approach involves attaching attention-based shallow classifiers on the intermediate layers of the neural network at different depths. During training, the deeper classifiers act as teacher modules and guide the training of student modules using the divergence metric-based loss on the outputs and loss of the feature maps. During inference, the additional shallow classifiers are dropped. Now here is the same model is used as the teacher as well as the student, but the difference comes at the difference comes at the different layers within the neural network, whereby intermediate layers of the neural network act as the student model, and then deeper layers act as the teacher model. uh, from the different visualizations that I've displayed is we've seen losses, we've seen a distribution loss, and I want to talk about losses in knowledge distribution. A knowledge distillation comes with two core major loss parts, and this is the distribution loss and the student loss. The distillation loss is this is a cross entropy loss between soft targets and soft predictions. To bring the student's network's predictions closer to those of the teacher network, knowledge distillation typically uses two loss functions. The distillation loss, also known as a soft loss, measuring the student's model soft targets against those of the teacher. The distillation loss, also known as a soft loss, measuring the student's model soft targets against those of the teacher. Instead of only using hard labels, knowledge distillation introduces soft labels produced by the teacher model. Now here, outputs of the teacher model are ones we call soft labels. The student model is trained using both standard cross entropy loss and the distillation loss, which encourages it to mimic the soft labels of the teacher. Now the overall distribution loss function is given by the formula below, where alpha is the hyperparameter typically that runs between 0.1 and 0.9, and this balances the standard training and distillation, whereby L of CE is the traditional cross entropy loss with hard labels, and the distribution loss is the knowledge distillation loss defined by the formula below. The second loss in knowledge distillation is the student loss. In knowledge distillation, the student loss is trained to learn from both the hard labels, which is the ground truth. Hard labels are now the inputs to the teacher model, and the soft labels, which are probability distribution classes provided by the teacher model as output. The student loss is a combination of two components. The cross entropy loss using hard labels, which is traditional supervised learning, and this is the standard loss function. This is the standard loss function used to measure the difference between ground truth labels and student model predictions. Another loss that contributes to the student loss is the distribution loss using soft labels from the teacher model, which we've just explained above. And the student loss is computed in the given function that is visualized, where yi is the ground truth label for the different classes of data, and the pi exponent s is the probability predicted by the student model for class I using the softmax temperature formation. And maybe just to add some information on the student loss is a couple of more concepts are required when we are to compute the student loss, and these are concepts are the hard targets and the hard predictions. The hard targets and the hard predictions. Now the hard targets is converting the soft target probability distribution into one hot contender, into one hot encoder, and you sort them by vectors by setting the high probability, which is always a 1 and the rest are zeros. Another concept is the hard prediction. This changes a bit. If you remember in the softmax prediction, if you remember in the calculating the soft predictions, the softmax function uses a temperature, and this temperature is a figure that runs between 0 and 1. But during hard predictions, we keep the value of t to 1 and then calculate the probability distribution across all tokens in our data. And these concepts contribute in the calculation of the student loss function. Thank you so much. This marks the end of my presentation, and for further reading, I've included in the links here that can give us more knowledge, or to whoever is interested in continuing to learn about this topic. Thank you so much.